Bruce Lee was asked, "How do you stay so fast?" by Tyson. His answer left Mike without a response. The answer that echoed in the silence. The gym was empty except for the two men in the center of the mat. The air was heavy with the smell of sweat and worn leather, the echo of the last punches still resounding off the walls. Mike Tyson, then 22 years old and at the height of his destructive rage, had challenged Bruce Lee to a sparring session. Not out of arrogance, at least, not entirely. There was something more, a voracious, almost desperate curiosity to understand what made that man, 15 years older, so fast that his movements seemed to defy the laws of physics. "How do you get so fast?" Tyson asked, the words coming out between clenched teeth, as if the question hurt. He had already tried to follow Lee's blows, but all he saw were blurs. His own hands, trained to crush skulls, now felt slow, clumsy. Bruce Lee stopped. He didn't smile. He didn't make any theatrical gestures. He just took a deep breath, as if he was about to dive into deep water, and then he said, "You're not fast. You're impatient." Tyson frowned. That didn't make sense. He was fast. The fastest in the world. Nobody could touch him. No one, except that thin, sharp-eyed man who was now watching him as if he could see through his skin. Impatient? Tyson repeated, his voice low, dangerous. Lee nodded. You attack with anger. With hunger. As if each punch is the last thing you will ever do. It blinds you. It traps you in the moment. True speed isn't in the muscles, Mike. It's in the mind. In the space between thought and action. You fill that space with strength. I empty it. Tyson felt his blood rise. That sounded like an insult. As if Lee was saying he was dumb, brute, an animal trained to hit. But before he could respond, Lee continued. Try this. Close your eyes. Breathe. Don't think about hitting. Think about not getting hit. Let the air pass through you. When the blow comes, you will have moved out of the way before you even knew it existed. Tyson laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. That's bullshit philosophy. In the ring, there's no room to breathe. There's blood, sweat, teeth flying. You don't know what it's like to really fight. Lee was unfazed. I know what it's like to fight for every second. You think speed is running faster than the other person. I think it's arriving before the other person knows you're already there. A silence weighed between them. Tyson looked at his hands, large, marked by scars. He had broken jaws, knocked out men in seconds. But there, in front of that man who barely weighed 60 kilos, he felt slow. Heavy. Show me, Tyson said, finally, his voice hoarse. Lee didn't hesitate. In a movement so fluid it seemed choreographed, he positioned himself, knees slightly bent, hands loose at his sides. He comes. Tyson advanced. Not with a punch, but with an attack, a roar of muscle and adrenaline, a blur of fists and shoulders spinning toward the target. Lee didn't move. Not until the last second. Then, as if pulled by invisible threads, his body shifted to the side, so light that the air barely stirred. Tyson's fist passed inches from his face, and before the champion could recover, he felt a touch, light, almost imperceptible, on his chin. You're still thinking about hitting, Lee said, standing 2 meters away. I was already here. Tyson stopped, panting. I wasn't tired. I was frustrated. Because, for the first time in years, he felt like a beginner. As if everything he knew about fighting was useless. This isn't a fight, Tyson muttered. That's dancing. Lee smiled, for the first time. Everything is dance, Mike. Until death. The weight of truth. The following days were torment for Tyson. He returned to training, but every punch he threw seemed slower. Each dodge, more clumsy. He would find himself standing in the middle of the ring, looking at his hands, as if they belonged to someone else. What's happening to you? 'Cause D'Amato, his coach, asked one night, as Tyson watched his reflection in the locker room mirror. "It looks like you're fighting yourself." Tyson didn't respond. How can we explain that, ever since that day with Bruce Lee, he saw ghosts in his own movements? That every time he tried to attack, he heard Lee's voice, "You're impatient." He tried to ignore it. After all, Lee wasn't a real fighter. Not like him. Lee hadn't stepped into a professional ring, hadn't faced men who wanted to kill him. But then, one sleepless night, Tyson remembered something Lee had said years earlier in an interview. "Don't have a way of fighting. Have a way of not fighting." What if that was it? What if true speed wasn't in being the strongest, but in not needing to be? The last lesson. The reunion happened by chance, in a Las Vegas parking lot, years later. Tyson was older, heavier, with new scars and a career that was beginning to decline. Lee, in turn, looked the same, thin, live, as if time hadn't touched him. "Still fast?" Tyson asked, leaning against a car, arms crossed. Lee laughed. "Are you still impatient?" Tyson didn't smile. I tried to empty my mind. I tried not to think about hitting. But in the ring, Mike Tyson can't afford not to think about anything. Or he dies." Lee nodded, as if expecting that answer. "Then you will never be fast. Because speed is not a technique. It is a choice. You chose to be strength. I chose to be absence." Tyson felt the anger return, but this time, it was different. It wasn't the blind fury it had been before. It was something colder, deeper. "What if I want both?" Lee stared at him for a long moment. Then, without warning, he tossed the car keys to Tyson. "Run after them." Before Tyson could react, Lee was already walking away, disappearing into the strip crowd. And for the first time, Tyson didn't feel like chasing him. Legacy of the Void. Mike Tyson never spoke about Bruce Lee in interviews again. But those who watched him fight in the years that followed noticed a change. He was still fast. It was still brutal. But there was something new in his movements, an economy, a precision that hadn't existed before. In 1995, when he knocked out Peter McNeely in 89 seconds, a reporter asked, "How can you be so fast after being out of the ring for so long?" Tyson looked at the camera, his eyes dark, almost empty. Then, as if reciting an ancient lesson, he said, "Because I stopped trying to be fast." And smiled. Not like a champion. Like a man who finally understood. The last punch. The following years were a slow descent, not of the body, which still responded with the same calculated violence, but of the soul. Tyson fought, won, lost, came back. Each knockout was a memory, each defeat an echo of what could no longer be recovered. He knew that. Coaches whispered that he was different, that there was something quiet about him, as if he carried a weight that couldn't be named. But no one dared to ask. In 2002, against Lennox Lewis, he was crushed. Not because of the punch, although Lewis' left hook was perfect, but because of the realization that the ring was no longer his temple. When he fell, it wasn't pain that overwhelmed him, but a strange clarity, "I no longer belong here." He got up, staggered, and when the referee stopped the fight, Tyson didn't protest. He just nodded, as if he had been waiting for this moment for decades. In the changing rooms, alone, he took off his gloves and left them on the bench. They were no longer yours. They were relics of a man who had once believed that strength was enough. Now he knew better. Strength was just a tool. And tools, when used too much, were out. The silence. He retreated to the Nevada desert, away from the cameras, the microphones, the eyes that still saw him as a monster or an idol. He bought a simple house, with a yard where he planted tomatoes and peppers, as if he was trying to grow something that couldn't be destroyed. Sometimes he trained with sandbags, not to fight, but to remind his body that he still existed. Other times, he would sit on the porch at dusk, watching the horizon turn orange and think about Lee. Not angry. Not with admiration. But with a kind of pity, not for Lee, who had died young and undefeated in his own legend, but for himself, who had lived too long to understand that victory was never the point. One day, a journalist found him. Young, insistent, with that hunger of someone who still believed in stories of redemption. "Mr. Tyson, what did you learn after all?" Tyson didn't look at him. He continued watching the sunset, his large hands resting on his knees. "That every punch you throw is a punch that someone taught you to throw. And that, in the end, you only hit the air." The reporter wrote it down, confused. But Tyson was already on his feet, walking into the house, leaving the door open behind him, like an invitation that no one dared accept. The void. Years later, when the disease consumed him, Tyson did not fight it. He accepted her as he accepted everything, with a tired smile, as if recognizing an old adversary. In the last few days, he asked to be taken to the desert. No to the hospital. No to the city. Just in the silence of the dunes, where the wind erased the footprints. There, lying on a blanket, with the sun burning his already fragile skin, he closed his eyes and saw Lee again. Not like the ghost of the strip, but like a shadow that danced in front of him, light, weightless. And then, for the first time, Tyson understood. It wasn't about speed. It wasn't about strength. It was about knowing when to stop. When he opened his eyes for the last time, the sky was clear. There was no pain. There was no regret. Just the emptiness, that same emptiness that he had spent his life trying to fill with punches, with titles, with blood. And finally, he was at peace. The desert's last breath. The wind stopped. For a moment, even the dunes seemed to hold their breath. Then a slow, hot gust swept across the sand, kicking up fine grains that clung to Tyson's skin like ash from a long-extinguished fire. He didn't cough. It didn't move. He just let the desert cover him, layer by layer, as if it had always been his place. A few meters away, the old rusty jeep that had brought him there was parked, the driver's door open. Inside, an old radio hissed static interspersed with fragments of a song no one else heard, something about roads and destinations, about hands that grip the steering wheel until they bleed. The driver, a man with a face marked by the sun and drink, waited with his hands in his lap. He didn't cry. He didn't pray. He just watched, as if he already knew that that moment didn't belong to him. When the sun reached its zenith, Tyson's body was no more than an outline beneath the sand. The wind, now stronger, began to erase even that. The dunes moved, swallowing what was left, as if there had never been anything there but sand and silence. The Phantom's legacy. On the Las Vegas Strip, 3 nights later, a young boxer stepped into the ring for the first time. His name was Danny Lightning Morales, and he had the wide eyes of someone who still believed that glory was made of punches and sweat. In the locker room before the fight, an old, limping trainer, one of the few who still remembered Tyson the Hurricane Lee, spit on the floor and muttered, "This boy doesn't know what it's like to lose." Across the gym, in a dark corner, a man in a gray suit watched. His face was a mask of scars, and one of his hands was bandaged, as if it had been smashed by a hammer. He didn't applaud. It didn't twist. He just lit a cigarette and let the smoke curl around his fingers, as if trying to hold on to something that had already escaped. "Did you see?" asked a voice behind him. It was a woman, dressed in black, with eyes that looked like she had seen too much. "The boy fights like him." The man took a long, deep drag. "No," he said, exhaling the smoke slowly. "He fights for him." And then, as if Tyson himself had whispered in his ear, he smiled. It wasn't a smile of victory. It was the smile of someone who finally understood that some stories don't end, they just change hands. Where the wind takes. Years later, when Tyson's memories had dissolved into legend, a group of tourists became lost in the Mojave Desert. Among them, a 17-year-old girl, with a camera hanging around her neck, walked away from the group to photograph the sunset. It was then that he saw it. In the middle of the dunes, almost imperceptible, a mark in the sand. It wasn't a footprint. It wasn't an animal track. It was a perfect circle, as if someone had drawn a ring in the dirt and then carefully erased it. In the center, a single object, a pair of boxing gloves, worn out, tied together. The girl hesitated. Then, as if something was pulling her, she knelt down and touched the gloves. They were cold, despite the heat. "Hey!" shouted someone from the group. "What did you think?" She didn't respond. He just put his gloves in his backpack and ran back, feeling the weight of something he couldn't name. That night, in a cheap motel, she dreamed of a man with empty eyes and bloody fists, dancing in the ring under lights that never went out. When he woke up, the gloves were missing from his backpack. But, in the back pocket of his jeans, he found a handwritten note, with shaky letters. "Run while you can. Then learn to stop." She didn't show it to anyone. He folded the paper and put it at the bottom of the drawer, along with the secrets that the desert always knew how to keep. The weight of silence. The next few days were a blur of dusty roads and avoided conversations. The group continued their journey north, but the girl, called only Lena by the others, felt increasingly distant. The words in the note echoed in his mind like a warning he couldn't ignore. "Run while you can." But where? And whose? On the third night, they camped in an abandoned area near an old train station. The wind howled between the rusty tracks, carrying a metallic smell that Lena couldn't identify. As the others laughed around the fire, she wandered away, drawn by a muffled sound coming from an abandoned train car. As he approached, he saw a figure hunched between the broken benches, a thin man, with scars on his arms and eyes that glittered like glass under the moon. "You took something that wasn't yours," he said, his voice hoarse as if he hadn't used it in years. Lena backed away, but the man didn't move. He just extended his hand, revealing his boxing gloves, now stained with something dark. "They're not for you," he continued. "They never were." Before she could respond, a scream cut through the night. One of the boys in the group, Raphael, had disappeared. Lena ran back to camp, but found only footprints deep in the dirt, as if something, or someone, had dragged him away. Panic spread. They searched for hours, calling his name, but the desert returned only silence. When dawn arrived, Lena found Raphael sitting against a rock, his eyes glassy, muttering disjointed words. The gloves were on his hands, clenched so tightly that his knuckles were bleeding. "He showed me," Raphael whispered, his voice broken. "What happens when you stop?" Nobody understood. But Lena did. In the following days, Raphael changed. He stopped talking, eating, reacting. He spent hours looking at the gloves, as if he was waiting for something. One night, while the others slept, Lena saw him get up and walk toward the desert, his gloves shining in the moonlight. She followed him, her heart pounding. He stopped in the middle of nowhere, raised his fists and began to dance, slow, precise steps, as if following a song that only he heard. Lena wanted to scream, but the words died in her throat when a shadow materialized behind him, the man with the scars, now accompanied by others, all dressed in torn clothes and empty eyes. "You know what you need to do," said the man, pointing to Raphael. Lena understood then. The gloves were not an object. They were a calling. And Raphael had responded. Without thinking, she ran over and snatched the gloves from his hands. Raphael fell to his knees, crying, as the empty-eyed man advanced. Lena clenched her fists, feeling the cold leather against her skin, and screamed. "Stop!" The entire desert seemed to hold its breath. The men stopped. They looked at her, then at the gloves, and backed away, as if something was repelling them. Raphael sobbed, clinging to her. "I didn't want to. I just wanted to stop." Lena hugged him, feeling the weight of what she had done. The gloves burned on her hands, but she didn't let go. The next morning, Raphael was back to normal, or almost. He remembered fragments, voices, a pain that wasn't physical. The group decided to continue their journey, but Lena knew she could no longer run away. That night, while the others slept, she returned to the abandoned train car. The scarred man was there, waiting. "You broke the rules," he said. "No," Lena replied, holding out her gloves. "I accepted them." The man smiled, a gesture that didn't reach his eyes. "Then you know what comes next." She knew. Years later, travelers passing through the desert told stories of a woman who appeared on full moon nights, dancing alone under the stars. Some said she wore boxing gloves. Others, that his fists glowed in the dark. But no one ever found Raphael again. And sometimes, when the wind blew hard, people swore they heard the sound of rhythmic footsteps on the sand, as if someone had finally learned to stop.